Before we get started today, I want to make a quick note. Today's show might be the most important one I've done to date. This absolutely does not discount the previous shows. In fact, today's discussion elevates the importance of all the shows prior to this one and of the shows yet to come. Why? Because today's show provides us with the framework and the reasons behind why we need to become brand new versions of ourselves. Pay particular attention to the story of Max, the accountant, and how his career is very much like the life of a turkey. If you've ever needed motivation to take action on the advice given in any of the previous shows, this is the podcast you need to listen to. Now, on with the show.
If you try to be entrepreneurial within an organization, and a lot of organizations, that gets you in trouble. You can't really build out your entrepreneurial skill set or start doing things inside of the organization, but at the same time, when the round of layoffs come, you're exposed to all the same risks. So you've got all of the downside with none of the upside.
Let's go! Hello and welcome to the Brand New You Show, the podcast dedicated to helping you build your brand. Each week we meet here to learn how building your brand can help you grow your influence, amplify your reputation, and ultimately impact your career. I'm your host, Ryan Roten, and today I welcome to the show someone who believes we must begin to impact our own careers. Taylor Pearson, founder of TaylorPearson.me. Taylor is an entrepreneur and the #1 best-selling author of the book, The End of Jobs: Money, Meaning, and Freedom Without the 9-to-5. The End of Jobs was rated by Inc.com as one of the top 3 start your own business books, as well as an overall top 25 business book in 2015. Taylor believes we are living through one of the largest socio-economic shifts in human history, the move from the knowledge economy to the entrepreneurial economy, which means that we are indeed racing towards the end of jobs. Taylor, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Brand New You Show.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited.
I'm really excited too. I read your book probably mid last year, and it really resonated with me. So I'm very excited to get into it. There's a lot of macroeconomic stuff that you talk about in your book, which I geek out on at times. But then you also bring it way down and you say, look, here's how you can deal with that, and here's how you can start to make this shift with the economy to the entrepreneurial one. And we're going to talk all about that stuff. But before we do, I have one question that I like to ask all of my guests. And considering your journey to this point, it'll be very interesting to see how you answer this question. But if you could vacation in only one place for the rest of your vacation days, where would you go?
I guess I'm just going to give the really cliche answer. I'd probably say home, probably just go hang out with my family. If I had to pick just one spot, let's probably at least have people that I liked and I wouldn't get sick of.
Okay. What about a destination place? Because you've traveled all over the world essentially as a part of your entrepreneurial journey to get where you are. Is there one place in particular that during your travels that you liked more than the others?
Yeah. So my favorite city right now is probably Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon, Vietnam, which actually I was living in Thailand and went to Vietnam. I was going to go for a week to visit a friend, and I ended up getting there. I threw away the return ticket and didn't come back for a year, and just totally fell in love. It's a really fascinating country. 3,000 years of history, which is for an American so hard to think about. They've been around for 3,000 years. And so they were occupied by the Chinese for 1,000 years. They were occupied by the French, occupied by the Americans. And they also have this kind of Southeast Asian aspect of their culture. So it's all these cultural, you're walking down the street and there's a French cafe, and then there's a Chinese dumpling place. And it's all smashed up, into the culture. And it's also a very entrepreneurial country, which is, I know it's politically communist, but in terms of the ethos of walking around the streets, very, very entrepreneurial, very high energy.
No one has said that one before, but I am curious, while you were overseas in that area, did you meet a gentleman by the name of Danny Flood?
I did. I think I saw him in Bangkok last year.
Okay. All right. Danny was on the show probably 2 or 3 episodes ago. He's got a fantastic story as well. Very inspirational guy, like yourself and like what I got from your book too. So it's pretty cool that it's a small world that you got to meet him there.
It is. It gets smaller every day, which is somewhat terrifying and somewhat great.
So as as I mentioned in the intro, one of the tenets really of your book is that we're actually shifting between two economies at this moment. We've been in this knowledge economy now for multiple years, and we're beginning to see this shift to this entrepreneurial economy. So with this in mind, I want to start off the questions about your book, The End of Jobs, Money, Meaning, and Freedom Without the 9-to-5, the same way that you start off your book, which is, have we actually reached the end of jobs?
So I think we've reached the end of jobs in the sense that we've crossed peak jobs, if you will. So there was this institution where people went to work in large corporations for long periods of time that existed, they still exist to some extent. But, maybe from 1950 to 1980 was kind of like the heyday, post-World War II up until sometime in the 80s. And that has tailed off. That kind of, day of you go in, you work 9-to-5, you work at one corporation, they move you around departments a couple times. That sense of jobs, the way most people think about it, is, I think, in its kind of dying days.
Okay. One key thing that I want to, before we, kind of get started going down this, I want to distinguish. You do a great job of distinguishing in your book the difference between when you say job versus entrepreneurship. And you relate them to systems, which is something I've never seen done before. But for me, who's a kind of a process system type geek, it really resonated with me. So can you explain the difference between a job and entrepreneurship from that standpoint?
Yeah. So the way I talk about it in the book is a job is you are walking into someone else's system and they're giving you the recipe to what to do, and you are following that recipe. You're following that system. So someone else comes in and builds the system, and you kind of follow the process documentation. Entrepreneurship, as I see it, is you are the one creating the system, which is it's not clear what needs to be done. You could do it this way or that way or one of 100,000 other ways, and you got to figure out what it is. So the difference between operating within a system or creating a system.
Most people, when they think of jobs, they're thinking of going to that corporation that you mentioned, and they go in, they sit at a desk, and they are very much doing a job, some system that someone else has created. And there's very little room, I think, in these positions now, even the ones that still exist, for any type of creativity to be able to invent your own kind of system. And sometimes even if you try, you find that, there's others that don't want you to do that.
Yes. And I think that's, I kind of talk about this in the book a little bit. That's one of the interesting things, which is if you try to be entrepreneurial within an organization, and a lot of organizations, that gets you in trouble. So you're kind of exposed to this. You can't really build out your entrepreneurial skill set or start doing things inside of the organization. But at the same time, like when the round of layoffs come or your division gets outsourced or whatever it is, you're exposed to all the same risks. So you've got, in a lot of these situations, you've got all of the downside with none of the upside. Yeah,
exactly. And one of the things that I find interesting, you had some statistics in your book. It's starting to move us into the direction of what, why are all these things starting to happen, especially at a macroeconomic level, which is prior to the year 2000, jobs were outpacing the population by 1.7%. But since 2000, population has actually been outpacing the creation of jobs by 2.4%. So when you just think of it at that rate, we're creating more people than there are jobs. So something at some point has to give. Are we at that point where we're at that peak of jobs then?
I certainly we're at the peak in the sense that the statistic reveals it, right? There are more and more people, and that rate is growing faster than kind of these traditional job opportunities are opening up. I think, and I know we'll get to this later, but I'm very optimistic about work and careers and opportunities in that, but not in the sense of someone's going to create this position for you and you can walk into the existing position. I don't think there's going to be a lot of that over the next 2-3 decades.
You mentioned also there's kind of three primary reasons why you believe that we are at that peak of jobs. There's communication technologies, what I'm calling the rise of the machines, which is kind of the software and hardware that's now being developed is starting to take over some lower level skilled jobs. And then the abundance of credentialization. What kind of role has the advancement in communication technologies played in helping move us closer to the end of jobs?
So I was talking with a friend, I was researching this section. I was talking with a friend that manufactured in China. And I was talking about, why has it gotten so much cheaper to manufacture in China? So if you talk to anyone that manufactures, I know in China, and I suspect it's somewhere other places overseas, it's gotten much, much easier in the last 10 years. That 10 years ago, you were like getting on a plane, you were flying to China, you were going to like be walking around Shenzhen, which is where a lot of this stuff goes down, looking for a broker who's then going to connect you to the factory, and you got to go through all these middlemen, and you're going to pay for an expensive first run. And now it's a lot like you go to Alibaba, you find the factory you're looking for in Alibaba, which is a site that's basically a directory of manufacturers in China. So you say, I'm looking for leather bags. It shows you all the leather bag manufacturers, and you get on a Skype call with them. And say, hey, here's my prototype. You send them the PDF over email. You used to have to like either fly over there to find the person, and then you're faxing back and forth.
Right.
And they say, yeah, we can't do that or we can't do that. So this research process to find a factory that used to take years, or you had to have some pre-established existing relationship because you used to work with them at another company, something like that, is now, broadly accessible. Alibaba is one site. Import Genius is another site where you can track where companies manufacture. So those kind of like the internet and the communication technology, particularly Skype, is really what's just facilitated connecting all these people.
I've lived through what you just described. I've lived through that. I was with a team about 10 years, a little over 10 years ago now, that we actually, flew over there, and we traveled around the country visiting places for potential manufacturing sites, to look at them, to see them, to meet them, because the technology to communicate with them even 10 years ago wasn't robust enough to be able to trust it, to have that conversation with someone. So I've lived what you're talking about, and I've seen that change with communication, and it really does make a difference, especially if you have to be on calls with people at 10, 11 o'clock at night because of the time difference, to talk through an issue that you may have up and you may have with manufacturing. And that's where I think the rise of what I'm calling the rise of the machines. And every time I say that, I hear the Terminator music playing in the back of my head.
Right.
I should stop saying that. But the software that exists now to allow those late night phone calls to take place, it's so much smoother. You can send documents across and everybody's looking at the same thing. You don't have to wait for the fax or the snail mail or something to show up. It's really facilitating the communication, I think, between, globally. It's making the world a smaller place.
Yeah. And so you're seeing that at the same time, those people in China, I think there were very few, and I don't know when you were there, but people I've talked to, it was very hard to find people that spoke competent English.
Yes, very hard.
10 or 15 years ago. And that's still true in some cases, but is also improved dramatically. So, you're like walking around China trying to talk to some guy in broken English 10 years ago. And now, you're sitting in your office talking over Skype with someone that speaks fluent English. So, you can imagine how much faster business gets done.
Right, exactly. And another thing that I've noticed too, we'll just stay on China for just a minute. I've noticed over the last 10, 15 years, I'm starting to see more, I'll say, highly educated workers that I start to interact with. More people have bachelor's degrees, more people have MBAs. And that really kind of talks to the abundance of the credentialization that you talk about in your book. And you're supposed to go to school, at least the paradigm has always been, go to school, get a job, go to work at that company, having that job that you referred to earlier for, basically your entire career, and then you retire and life is good. A part of that plan included, for some people, going to get higher level degrees. But yet, why does it seem today that MBAs and even JDs now can't get jobs as readily as what they used to?
So if you think about kind of the foundation of really the education system, but particularly the university and post-grad system, it's founded on this idea of knowledge being scarce. So if you wanted to go do clinical psychology 30 years ago, and I'm just making up a random example, you have to go to the library at whatever the closest clinical psychology department is, and go through the textbooks, and to go to all this trouble, you almost have to show up there. You might as well just go to the school in the first place. And that's not really true anymore, right? I think the quantified self movement in medicine is a really interesting example. That you have all these people who didn't used to have access to the same tools doctors do or the same information doctors do, and now they do. And a lot of them are kind of doing pioneering, interesting things in medicine that only people that went to medical school could do 20 or 30 years ago. So the kind of the value of these degrees as, access to scarce knowledge is going down and down and down as, again, like the internet has kind of created this information equality across the spectrum.
Yeah. One of the things you talk about in the book that kind of really perked me up when you were discussing kind of how the education system began. And there was a gentleman who founded the normal school, if I remember correctly, or maybe it was the common school.
Yes.
And basically those schools were created to teach people how to do those jobs that you talked about. The processes you created, we want you to be smart enough to come in and do it, correct?
Yes.
And that's back when knowledge was scarce. But like you just said, with the advent of the internet, knowledge is much more readily accessible. I was listening to your book and somebody went to MIT and took all their online classes and got a degree at MIT for like a fraction of the cost if they would have gone to the actual school.
Yes. So that was in the book. There was a guy named Scott Young.
Okay.
And that was what he did. He said, I want to get a bachelor's in MIT in computer science. And MIT had the whole syllabi and curriculum and lectures online. And so he bought the books off Amazon or Barnes and Nobles or whatever and sat down and just paced himself out. So he did every class in like 2 weeks, 8 hours a day. And in a year, put himself through the entire MIT curriculum.
That's pretty impressive. And just think, 10 years ago, you never would have been able to do something like that.
No.
Let me ask you this, as you've done your research and you've studied and you've seen education and the job landscape evolve, is it a better investment, do you think, these days to go back to school and get a higher level degree, or is it better to take the same amount of time you would spend in school and actually go out and get experience?
I mean, I would definitely say the latter option, which is no surprise. But I think a lot of people, we're buying into this logic of what was true in the second half of the 20th century is going to be true in the 21st, which is if you go back to get a degree, it increases your lifetime earnings by whatever that particular degree statistics are. And I'm sure every degree has their own statistics. And we kind of like assume that's going to be true. But again, like as kind of as we've been talking about, I think in a lot of ways, like track record is the new credential. And then if you can go and get the kind of entrepreneurial experience, if you can go work in a company or put yourself in a situation where, again, you're the one creating the systems as opposed to operating within them, that's a much better investment just on your time. I'm not even considering, that often costs nothing or you can get paid to do it in a company. Just on the time investment alone, I think is a much better way to think about and approach your career.
Which of the three factors that we just discussed, the rise of communication, the rise of the machines, credentialization, which ones do you think have had the most impact to help aid the rise of globalization?
I would say to this point, I would probably say communication technology, because communication technology, it's kind of interwoven with this commoditization of credentialism, right? Because not only are there more and more people with degrees, it's easier and easier to find them, right? So you can log on to sites like Upwork or LinkedIn. And it's, you're not the only person someone knows with a law degree. They can go find, 1,000 other lawyers with a Google search. So that like technology, I think, has kind of done the most. I think maybe going forward, I suspect it might be more the rise of the machines. But to this point, I would say communication technology.
Now, when I say the word globalization, some people listening are probably going to shudder a little bit because they immediately assume globalization equals outsourcing. And, to this point, when people think of outsourcing, they usually associate that with a blue collar position where, somebody's doing simple work that can easily be transferred somewhere else. But I've noticed, and I'm sure you have as well, you mentioned it in the book, that we're starting to see now also a rise of outsourcing even more white-collar jobs. Do you see that trend continuing, or do you see it leveling off over the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
So I guess my question isn't whether the trend's going to continue. I definitely think it is. My question is, will it continue, or will machines kind of beat it to the punch? So I'll tell a story, and I think I might have had this in the book. I had a friend I was talking to a couple of years ago, and he'd had an accountant who he had on retainer and was paying, we'll say $1,000 a month. I can't remember the exact number. Was doing a terrible job. They were based in Southern California. He found this woman online who was based in Sri Lanka for $50 a month. who had a university degree, who understood accounting, who understood U.S. tax law. And he hired her, and he was like, yeah, she's twice as good as my old accountant. And so again, you see in like the communication technology, like he just hops on Skype with her to talk about his taxes, and he emails everything over, or he sends it over through, Xero or QuickBooks Online. And it works for her, right? If she can earn, $1,000 a month between 20 clients in Sri Lanka, that's a very white collar wage there.
You address this in the book, and I kind of commend you for not skipping over this part because it's a reality and people feel this. But there are people who are going to be listening to this who think it's kind of outsourcing is kind of unfair, or maybe even unjust. What do you say to those folks who believe that?
I think a lot of that's colored by the way the media often portrays outsourcing, and it's not. No one clicks the story that says, yet another factory where workers are treated humanely. Like they click the one where it's like the really horrific conditions. And I definitely, I've heard stories of pretty horrific conditions, and I'm sure some of them are true, but I think that's true of almost everything. And I think as more and more people become more globally minded and they start to see like the real long-term impact on their business, hiring someone in another country and treating them poorly is just the same as hiring someone and treating them poorly in the US. Like they don't want to work for you for a very long time. They don't want to work very hard, and they don't really care about the company. So I think all those factors will still play out. And I think it's good business to treat people well. And I think people are figuring that out with outsourcing now as much as within their companies.
A lot of what we've been talking about, with the exception maybe of the abundance of credentialization, a lot of it can be contributed to or say birthed from the internet, which is adding a lot of efficiencies, and it's doing a lot of things to help move us, I think, into that entrepreneurial economy that we're moving to. And, it's even contributed to this globalization that we're talking about as well. But it's also done something else that's, I think, equally impressive as moving us, shifting us from one economy to another. But it's created this thing that Chris Anderson refers to in his book as a long tail. What is the long tail?
The long tail is this idea that if you look at traditional retail, so you think of a CD store 20 years ago, they have enough room for 5,000 products, 5,000 different CDs they can carry. So if you are the 5,001st best artist, it doesn't matter because you're not going to make it into the CD store. So these first 5,000 is what Chris Anderson would call the fat head. So these are kind of like traditional retail in order for the economics to work, because if you, put your detergent on the store at Walmart or your CD in the record store, it costs space because it takes a physical space and they pay for that square footage. Whereas like you think about Amazon selling CDs or even buying MP3s, right? It costs them no space. To add another product page on Amazon has a marginal cost of basically zero. And so it's created this long tail where all these, CDs, maybe CD 5,000 through 1 million that you couldn't have ever stocked in a record store, you can stock in, on Amazon.com. You can stock every book. Because it doesn't cost them, they don't have any shelf space. It doesn't cost them anything to do that. They just add a product page, and when someone clicks the buy now button, they'll print a copy and ship it out.
And it's enabling people like you and me to use their systems that they've already created for us to be able to sell stuff through their system as well, which is pretty cool.
It's amazing. I just had dinner this week with 9 other authors, and I was the only person at the table that had self-published, and we were just talking about it, and they were like, you have so much leverage, because if you're negotiating with a publisher or whatever, like you can just say, well, I'll just do it myself. And now you can, and that didn't used to be possible.
In the book, we talk about 3 factors that are a part of the long tail. There's the democratization of tools of production, democratization of distribution, and new markets that get created every day. Let's talk briefly. What is the democratization of the tools of production?
So you think about like the tools of production, and the image that comes to mind for me is like a Ford factory from like the 1920s, right? So it's like this huge warehouse, and it's got people on an assembly line. And if you wanted to build something, if you wanted to build a car, you have to own this giant factory. Or if you wanted to make clothes in, the 1950s, you had to have this huge supply chain. Or if you wanted to print books in the 1950s, right, you had to have relationships with the factory, and you had to have warehouses, and you had to have logistics and infrastructure. And so we'll take books as an example. Like book publishers have all those things. They have warehouses in New Jersey, and they have fleets of trucks. because that was what you used to be able to have to print books. And now we were just talking, there's a service that Amazon has called CreateSpace that's print on demand. So someone goes to Amazon, they click buy now. The order goes through Amazon's system. It goes to a printer in one of their factories. It prints a brand new copy of the book. They put it in a box and they ship it to someone in 2 days. So, you write it on your computer and all of a sudden, you have the tools of production.
Just that you can do that is still mind boggling, I think, to a lot of people, especially if you think just 2 generations back, my grandparents would be blown away by something like that.
Yeah, I'm still blown away by it.
It's pretty amazing.
It's amazing.
What about the democratization of distribution?
So this distribution channel, which used to be narrow, is now very, very broad. Or, you look at TV or radio, TV used to be 3 channels. And now there's YouTube, right? Everyone's got their own TV channel. And radio used to be 10, 20, 30 stations. And now there's podcasts. And there's, thousands and thousands of, quote unquote, radio stations that anyone can tune into. So to do a podcast of probably the quality we're doing now on the radio 10 or 20 years ago was tens of thousands of dollars. And, I'm doing this interview on a $10 pair of headphones and a $50 USB mic.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Part of this too is that new markets get created every day. And specifically, we're talking about niche markets. But when you say they get created every day, how is that possible?
So I've really been trying to hammer this idea out more because I think there's a lot more than I said in the book. But you think about these these new tools of production, these new tools of distribution. All of a sudden, you can do things that seem so niche that they were never viable in kind of an offline retail world. So I'm wearing a shirt right now. It's from a company called Mission in Maine. It's a medium tall shirt, which is really a very difficult size to find. It is made out of this sweat wicking, no smell fabric. So if you travel a lot, you can crumple it up and throw it into your bag. And it's blue, which is my favorite shirt color. So basically, this shirt is only good for tall guys wearing blue shirts that travel a lot. So it doesn't make sense for Macy's to stock that shirt because they're not going to sell 10 million of them every Christmas. But yeah, maybe you could sell 50,000 of them every Christmas, and at $100 a pop, that's a real business.
Now, if we take all 3 of those together holistically, how has the long tail impacted the ability for individuals, you and I, and anybody listening today, to actually become entrepreneurs?
It's radically democratized access. So what used to be very, very expensive, you fly to China to get a product, or you rent a storefront to launch a store, can now be done very, very cheaply. You call the guy in China on your Skype phone. And your store is, a Shopify or a WordPress website, which costs you $20 a month.
I want to start to make the transition now from what I'm kind of referring to as the background, building up to this point here, and start transitioning to entrepreneurship. And I want to start it with something that most people still think, which is they look at their traditional career as a pretty safe path. Do you agree? Is that still a safe path today?
I think it's very easy to confuse or conflate volatility with risk. So you think of, stability or lack of change as necessarily being safe. And I would define risk as, the possibility of an irreversible outcome. So the example I talk about in the book is I would call the turkey problem. So if you imagine a turkey's born, and every day for its life, everything about its life experience confirms that everything is safe and everything is getting better. So it's in the pen, the butcher comes out and feeds it, it puts food in the trough, the turkey walks around, it, bathes in the sunshine, whatever it is turkeys do. And that's true every day over and over until the day before Thanksgiving. When the butcher walks out, and this time it's not to feed the turkey, it's to, get him ready for dinner the next day. So for, 3 years, leading up until the day before, that turkey's appointed Thanksgiving, everything is going great for the turkey. Everything looks safe. And so I think a lot of people are in jobs that are facing that exact same situation. So, you're not going to see your paycheck start to go down by 2% every week or 2% every month as things get worse, right? Everything stays the same, until they call you into the office or until the company announces a round of layoffs because they outsourced it or because it got automated away or because the company's becoming irrelevant.
I think you labeled part of this silent risk, which I thought was really a great term for it. And you give a very good example that I think would be relatable to a lot of the listeners about Max the accountant. and how he builds up silent risk during his career. Would you mind sharing that story with us?
Yeah. So if you imagine Max, and this was named after a friend of mine. That's not his real name, but he goes to school. He gets an accounting degree. He goes to work in a large corporation in the accounting department. Does well, moves up every 3 to 5 years. He does that, through his 20s, through his 30s, and he gets to say maybe 40, 45. He's got a family. He's got 2 kids. He's got a mortgage. He's got all these lifestyle expenses. Every month he's got to make this payment, and he's paying it with the money coming in from his paycheck. So now if we kind of impose this turkey problem, that all of a sudden what happens is, the company finds out about my friend's accountant, which is in Sri Lanka, and charges a fifth as much, or the company figures, they can, a lot of its data entry, and they can move the data entry overseas, or they can automate it. All of a sudden, Max is in a very tough spot, right? So his entire skill set is built around something which all of a sudden just disappeared, or for the demand for it just radically went down. His professional network, all his friends, all his contacts, everyone he knows are in this same situation. And so I think that's a really scary, dangerous place to be.
Some people, when they hear the word entrepreneurship, they kind of get a little scared because, if you look at the traditional model that we've been talking about, go to school, get a job, all that, well, there's no school for entrepreneurship. Is entrepreneurship a skill set that can be learned?
I think it is. And I think that's kind of another interesting thing that I think the media probably does a disservice is the stories you always hear are often self-aggrandizing entrepreneurs talking about, I've been selling lemonade since I was 4 years old and cutting deals and yada, yada. It makes for a great story, and for marketing and branding reasons, I understand why people tell it, but it doesn't really ring true for me. And in my research, it didn't seem to be the case that, in fact, just like you can learn marketing, or you can learn accounting, or you can learn any other skill set, that there's a discipline of entrepreneurship. And that there are increasingly pathways to doing that. If you're in an entrepreneurial corporation, moving into a startup or into a company, a small, what I would call like a fast growth small business. So a small business that's not like a barber shop, but is based on the internet, is using technology, is growing quickly. Those sorts of roles are inherently more entrepreneurial. Starting to do consulting or freelancing on the side, like learning to sell yourself, is kind of, I think, a way you can invest in the skill set of entrepreneurship.
Let's compare and contrast, if you would, for a minute, the difference between entrepreneurial risk and silent risk.
So I think the key differentiator there is how visible the risk is. So again, you're sitting at, Max is 39 years old. It's the year before he's going to get laid off. He's sitting in his job. Everything seems fine to him. If he looks back at, the history of the last 50 years in this company, there's always been an accounting department. Everything's been, accountants have gone their whole careers there and they've retired and everything's been great. And so this risk is silent, right? There's no way he sees it coming. Whereas entrepreneurial risk is much more visible, right? So, you're running a consultancy or you're running a business and revenue drops by half. Really quickly that something has gone wrong. You have a very close feedback mechanism with the market. Whereas, the labor market, the job market, you don't typically have that feedback mechanism that you don't find out until it's already too late.
Let's assume for a minute that we've inspired some people who are listening, and they think, okay, maybe I might want to take a stab at this entrepreneurship thing. You discuss in your book a method called the stair-step method to kind of get started. What is the stair-step method?
The idea behind the stair-step method is that entrepreneurship is basically like any other skill. So, if you want to learn how to lift weights, you don't go into the gym the first day and put 400 pounds on the bench press machine and start bench pressing 400 pounds.
Wait, you don't?
Maybe you do. I certainly couldn't do that. You go in and you put, you take the bar, you take a light amount of weight and you start bench pressing that. And then, your body adapts, and the next day you go in and you put in a little more weight. And, after 4 or 5 years, all of a sudden, maybe you can, bench press 300 pounds or whatever it is. And so I think the idea behind the stair-step method is the same idea, that you want to start finding ways to be stair-stepping gradually your way up into entrepreneurship. So specifically, the way a lot of people seem to do that is through 2 specific first steps. One of those is the idea of creating a product or doing a kind of a side project to whatever your main income source is, your job, whatever you're doing, and getting that to the point where it can replace your job income. So these are often, simple products. So WordPress plugins are something I see a lot of technical developers do, or Amazon is like now a very popular way people do that, or it's consulting on something related to, their existing skill set. So, they were an accountant within a corporation and they've gone out and they've gotten private clients. So this idea that you can kind of gradually work your way up.
How important is creating new relationships and expanding kind of your circles as you move into entrepreneurship?
So I think there's a really tight feedback mechanism there, in that when you go out and you do something and you find some degree of success with it, or you do it in an interesting way, even if it's not successful, that tends to generate relationships, which then tends to make the next thing easier to do, which then you accomplish, which then generates new relationships. So yeah, I think that's a very key part of this. And again, like we go back to the example of Max. Like part of Max's problem was he doesn't really have an entrepreneurial network. He doesn't have any resources outside of people that are in a very, very similar situation to the one he is, where, if Max knows people that are doing all sorts of different things in all sorts of different industries, it's going to be much easier for him to transition around. And again, like he's going to take away a lot of that silent risk, and it's going to become visible. I see this is coming, or this is coming, or this is coming, and I can adapt.
Right. And in this example, had Max been networking and been out creating new relationships, he might have been able to find someone who could help him or offer him an apprenticeship. And I'm hearing apprenticeship come up more and more in different conversations I'm having with people. And so, why would somebody want to do an apprenticeship? What would be the advantage of that?
So let me come back to the gym analogy here. So we take this idea that, entrepreneurship is a skill set that you can learn. And you want to kind of start at the beginning and work your way up. So I think there's kind of the same distinction that, people, you go to school, or you go to graduate school or whatever, and you read something in a book. But, no matter how many times you read about the mechanics of bench pressing, how to do the perfect form, no matter how many times you go to the gym and observe exactly how that works, it doesn't really do anything for you. It doesn't do much for you until you actually start, bench pressing the bar, picking up the weight. And so the kind of the logic behind apprenticeships is that the same is true for entrepreneurial work. That if you're working on, learning the skill set of how do you create a system, how do you build systems, how do you identify and execute on opportunities, that one of the best ways to do it is to go find someone that is already doing it and that knows how to do it, and to learn from them. So I'll give an example actually of someone that emailed me recently. They traditionally worked at a large financial institution. It was very corporate. Their job was fairly boring, and they could tell they weren't really moving along. And so what they did was, they had a skill set that was based on their education and their background, and it was valuable. And they took it to a much more entrepreneurial company, a 25-person company. And all of a sudden they started to get this figured out. And they started to learn sales, and they started to learn all these other skill sets they couldn't learn in their job, but they, kind of transitioned that into a situation that is more entrepreneurial.
I would imagine there's probably a lot of people listening who are saying, I really want to do that. I want to feel like I'm contributing in a meaningful way, and I'd like to become an entrepreneur, but I have a family, I have a mortgage, 2 more years, and I'll get 4 weeks of vacation. Are there other methods besides the stair step and the apprenticeship that you would recommend to those people that they could just at least dip their toes in, or as Danny Flood said, kind of lean into entrepreneurship just a little bit?
I think the word apprenticeship is deceiving because it implies kind of like someone at the very, very beginning of their career, which in some cases it is. But I think the big idea there in my mind is that you are optimizing more for learning and more for the long term. So I think someone that is 40, 45 years old, that has 20, 25 years left in their career, going into a position where they can kind of optimize for learning for 2 to 3 years, if it means some slight reduction in income, as long as you can still pay the bills, I think it's going to play out better over the long run. And there are startups with lots of money and big budgets right now that are trying to hire talented people. So that's certainly one way I see a lot of people moving. And then, the other thing is, can you do it on the side? until you get to the place where you can replace your corporate income, which is something else I see a lot of other people doing, that either they start consulting with their corporate skill set on the side, or they start some other sort of business, Amazon or drop shipping or e-commerce, until they can, make that transition safely, right? So you're not, leaving your job and you don't have any money in the bank and you don't have any other sources of income, but you're slowly transitioning out, and you can make the transition when you feel it's financially responsible.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing people need to realize, right? Is you're not, in your book, you're not espousing just take the leap and jump. You're actually kind of helping people ease into the thought process of becoming an entrepreneur. And I do think it's a mental kind of bridge that people have to cross to go from the mindset of I'm an employee, I've always been an employee, I do a job, to I'm going to become an entrepreneur and I'm going to create jobs and I'm going to create the processes so that other people can do the job.
I agree. I think and that's one of the benefits I see of apprenticeships and side projects, is you can fund a lot of those mindset shifts pretty cheaply. If you want to spend a few $100 on a side project, you can learn a lot from that, a lot more than you'd learn by, say paying $5,000 to go back and take a class at maybe the local university, or $2,000, whatever it costs. And you can kind of fund that entrepreneurial education.
I'm hopeful that we have convinced some people here to at least start considering the options that are available to them now that just didn't exist before, because it is much easier to move in the entrepreneur direction. You just have to kind of get up off the couch and go do something. But for those people who aren't yet convinced, you do provide a very simple exercise in the book called the hallway test. What is the hallway test?
So the hallway test is, you're sitting in your office, you're sitting in your cubicle, and you lean back and you look down the hallway to the corner office, and you look at the guy in the corner office and you say, is that the corner office I want to be sitting in? And if it's not, where do you want to be sitting? And how can you do things differently to get there?
Taylor, we'll start to wrap up here, but I have one last question for you. And this is a question you pose in the book, but I'm going to pose it to you. 50 years from now, when you look back at your life, what do you hope to see?
I think, the thing that gets me excited, the thing that wakes me up in the mornings is I do think we are going through a dramatic shift. That, we've moved from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy to a knowledge economy. And I now think we are shifting out of that knowledge economy into an entrepreneurial economy. And so I would like to, have helped in a substantial way a lot of people make that shift and kind of equip them with the tools and the ways of thinking in order to be able to do that effectively.
I know for me, you definitely equipped me with the tool that I needed, which was your book, The End of Jobs. For me, it was a fantastic, eye-opening book. And, I highly recommend it to anybody that's listening. So for those listeners who would like to get in touch with you or would like to pick up a copy of the book, what is the best ways for them to do that?
So you can get a copy of the book on Amazon.com. If you want to download a few chapters, you can go to EOJ, as in endofjobsbook.com, and download a few chapters to check out before you buy. And then the best way to get in touch with me is probably Twitter. I'm at Taylor Pearson ME, and then my email is taylor@taylorpearson.me. And I do love hearing from people, so please drop me an email.
All right, cool. Do you have any final thoughts, words of wisdom, any kind of tips you would like to pass on to anybody that's listening today?
I do. So I think kind of one of the messages I wanted to get across, or maybe the message I wanted to get across in the book, is I think a lot of people have this mindset of, if I just hunker down, I can weather out this storm and it'll all work out. And I think, that might be true for people that are 65, 70, or, at the very, very end of their careers. But I think it's, particularly difficult for people that are in the middle of their careers to say, I'm 15 or 20 years down this path and I need to make a big change. And the point I really want to drill home with the book is, you're going to have to make the change sooner or later. And that sooner is going to be a lot less painful than later.
Yeah, make it on your own terms versus somebody dictating the terms to you.
Yes.
All right, Taylor, thank you very much. It's been a very enlightening and inspiring conversation for me personally. I really, really enjoyed your book. So it's been fun, talking to you and getting to know you. And wish you the best of luck as you continue to promote the book, and hopefully people go out and buy it. And just thank you for being a guest today.
Yeah, terrific questions. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
So what do you see when you look down the hallway? Do you see yourself in that corner office? Is that what you want for your career? If so, that's great, and I sincerely hope that you get there sooner rather than later. Just be aware that as you're making your way to that corner office, you are building up silent risk along the way, like Max and a Thanksgiving turkey. Also know that it is highly unlikely that you'll ever receive a Thanksgiving Day pardon by the president. On the flip side, if you don't see yourself in that office at the end of the hallway, where do you see yourself? And more importantly, what actions are you taking today to prepare yourself for your career tomorrow? It's never been cheaper or easier to start your own business. Because of the democratization of the tools of production and distribution, it's now possible to lean into entrepreneurship using the stair-step method by leveraging your current skills and experiences. But to do that, you need to get out of your seat and get started moving. And who knows, once you do, you might just find a new hallway to explore. Thank you, Taylor, for being a guest on the show today and for giving us a solid methodology to get started down the entrepreneurial hallway. Thanks also to those of you listening in to our conversation today. You know I greatly appreciate you tuning in each and every week. If you enjoy the show, share it with a friend, a coworker, or anyone that you feel is racking up silent risk or living the life of the turkey. Do you have any questions about the end of jobs that you would like Taylor to address? If so, let's carry the conversation over to Facebook. You can find the show page at facebook.com/brand new you podcast. There you can leave your comments and questions for Taylor and I, and we'll be happy to answer them for you. That wraps us up for today. The show notes can all be found on the website at ryanroten.com/Taylor Pearson. So until next week, I've been Ryan, and I'm out. Today's show was edited and produced by Ryan Roten, and the intro and outro music is Pulse by Sound Road.